Broadcom reported earnings last night. Revenue growth accelerated to 28%. Free cash flow jumped 36%. It wasn't enough to encourage investors. The stock initially moved up in after-hours trading yesterday. It then erased those gains during the earnings call and swung negative, and it opened in the red this morning. To break it all down, I want to bring on Tomasz Tunguz, general partner at Theory Ventures. Tomasz, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here.
Great to be here, Akash. Thanks for having me on.
So what did you think of the results?
I think the AI ecosystem is on a knife edge right now where any perceived weakness, real or not, or any like satisfaction of expectations leads to pretty significant drawdowns. I mean, you look at the overall growth of Broadcom relative to NVIDIA, it's not growing as fast, although it is much more of a services business than NVIDIA. You have the Google TPU business, particularly with Anthropic, that seems to be growing pretty quickly. Meta is a very significant customer, spending a lot, massively increasing their CapEx spend at the expense of their virtual reality ecosystem here. And so you have a very, very healthy business, great margins, great cash flow from operations, approximately between 25 to 27%.
Right.
You have a pretty significant backlog. And I think the only thing that you could pick at the overall earnings statement was that some of that RPO might be a little bit, remaining performance obligations might be a little bit more delayed relative to where analyst expectations had thought they would come in.
I mean, look, let's call it what it is. I thought the numbers were good. Honestly, I mean, you have accelerating revenue, you have free cash flow. They talked about the big customers they have using the XPUs, Apple, SSI, Anthropic, Google, a fifth customer that they didn't want to name on the call, but they obviously have been working with OpenAI in some capacity, whether or not it's that fifth big customer. You know, the thing that I was looking at this morning was the valuation of Broadcom relative to NVIDIA. And based on the revenue estimates, Broadcom is actually trading higher, which I think might be what people were getting at.
I think that's right. I mean, you have very elevated multiples. And I mean, we know from all the previous hardware cycles, whether it's telecom or also hardware, hard disks, that any miss here, you have a very significant drawdown. And because of the CapEx here so intense. So if there's any weakness whatsoever or any perceived sign of potential weakness in the future, I mean, you saw it with Oracle earlier this week where the RPO was absolutely massive, but the timing of that RPO remains unclear. And will people actually end up using this? I think that's the major factor that people are trying to understand. Like, okay, OpenAI is committed to spending a particular amount. Google is committed to spending a particular amount. CapEx is growing. It'll probably be somewhere close to 3% or more of US GDP next year in terms of data center build out. Will the inference be there? And all signs point to yes, but if there's any indication that there's a deviation in that plan, then the drawdown will be significant. And so I think that's why you have this sensitivity. The only other way I sort of interpret the market is a bit of profit taking. The stock has ripped this year, and there's tends to be some profit taking before the end of the year. And so maybe that's another reason.
Well, it certainly would be a nice Christmas present for sure. I want to ask you about Hock Tan. We wrote this great profile about Hock in our weekend magazine last week, and he's an iconic CEO in the world of chips. I wonder what the discussion is in Silicon Valley about Hock Tan as a leader. You know, what do people make of his leadership and the way that he's running the company?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's done a phenomenal job, right? You see the core technical advances. I mean, Broadcom is some of the best technology to what's called serialization and deserialization technology, and the speeds there on the GPUs, I mean, are 224 gigabit per second. Nobody else can come close. You know, there was a rumor that Google might be bringing some of this capacity in-house for the chip design, but I think given the relative performance of Broadcom compared to Marvell and Synopsys, it's really unlikely. So I think he's done a really nice job building a pretty phenomenal business. It's also diversified, right? Compared to NVIDIA, where 75 to 80% of the revenue now is primarily within data center. Broadcom has an AI business that's growing about 75% per year, but it represents something like 30% of the overall business. And so if there were to be a drawdown, you have nice core intellectual property. It's very difficult, even for the hyperscalers, to replicate. You're talking about hiring thousands of people, pretty significant engineering investment over the course of multiple years to come anywhere close, and then a nicely diversified business. So to your point, like it's kind of a head scratcher about the overall stock performance given this business.
Well, I was texting with some analysts last night during the call, and if you look at the stock movement, basically after this first question that analysts asked about Google bringing the capacity in-house, right? That was the answer that they were not very impressed with, investors I'm talking about. And analysts sort of said he didn't give as reassuring an answer as they would have hoped about their advantage there. I wonder how much of a threat you think that is to Broadcom's business, this idea of customer-owned tooling, I guess, that they could design their own custom chips on their own in-house. It seems like a big endeavor.
It's a huge endeavor. These are massively complex systems, and there are many different dimensions to it. So, I think 2 or 3 years ago, there was the rumor that Google was trying to build this in-house. Google pays something like 30 to 50%, according to analyst estimates of the BOM for chip design. And so you can imagine that this will be an important thing for them to be able to do at some point. And it's incredibly technically difficult. No one has come close on some of these throughputs on particularly the serialization, deserialization component, where you can imagine a GPU is processing a huge volume of data in parallel. It has to aggregate that to send it to the next step. And then that next step has to take it and deaggregate it and parallelize it. That's the bottleneck for a lot of these GPUs systems, aside from in and around memory. And so as long as Broadcom has head and shoulders advantage there, then I think they'll still have a phenomenal business. But if you're Google and you're trying to compete with them or trying to capture more margins on the TPUs and Meta and others, will you be trying? I think you will be trying, but I can't imagine this changes in the next 2 or 3 years.
Great. Well, Tomasz, it's always a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you for coming on the show. We really appreciate it.
A pleasure is mine. Thank you, Akash.
Talk to you soon.